Yes, I think I have about 20 minutes or so, 20 or a little more, but I'm going to try to keep to my time. I basically wanted to share a few things that I wish I had known earlier on in my career, and things that really just keep coming up as I work with women, and especially junior women, in the capacity of coaching and mentoring and running these career development programs. So I picked a few of them. There's obviously many, many things, concepts and challenges to discuss, but so I just want to set the context, and I know you all have seen, I suspect, this pipeline chart from the AAMC. Thank goodness for the AAMC, because without them, we really wouldn't have a sense about what is the data, like what in aggregate of all of our medical schools, what does the advancement of women look like now and in the past. So the AAMC, does their data collection yearly, but really presents it in aggregate like this now only every 5 years. So this 2018-19 data set is the most recent. And again, many of you have probably seen this, but there's good news and there's bad news here. And I think the bad news is obvious. You can see that women start out, and when I say women, I'm talking about all women, and clearly when we break down the underrepresented minority women and women of color, I mean, this is really an even more discouraging, data set. In fact, my understanding right now is that all underrepresented minority faculty, men and women, only make up 6% of academic medical faculty across the country. So just to start off, there's so much work to be done there. But anyway, the discouraging news, again, that the advancement of women has been slow. I mean, now, for those of us that have been around for 40 years, some of these numbers are actually numbers that we never thought would happen, because deans and department chairs and division chiefs were in the low single digits 30 years ago and even 20 years ago. So the good news is that, we are advancing slowly, but there's obviously all the barriers that you all face every day, and we're going to talk about approaching some of those. The other good news is that with 51% of medical students being women, and that was 3 years ago, the most recent data that I understand is that it's 52.4% of medical students across the country are women. And there's power in numbers. And I think that, there's reason to be cautiously optimistic about that. And the fact that faculty now, it's 41% women and growing. And I do think that there is a time when most physicians and most academic physicians are women. So there's power in numbers, and the talent in those numbers is just amazing. And all we all have to do is just look around. And I think it's funny because, over 20 years ago, the CEO of Deloitte said, if you lose high-performing women who make up half the new hires, you'll have to go deeper down into the talent pool. And he thus started an entire program to try to retain and advance women. But I do think that there is almost a tipping point, and it may be a tipping point that's accelerated by our dual pandemics of our racial reckoning and of COVID, that there's really an opportunity to accelerate change. So, I mean, the challenges that remain are stubborn and quite substantial. Obviously, opportunities for leadership is just one of the huge ones that we continue to see. Dismantling structural racism, really making our cultures in our institutions welcoming and equitable and inclusive for all the marginalized groups. Looking at salary, which just continues to be a problem and has been shown so many times we can't stand it because every new study seems to show the same thing. And then burnout. And then I'm not going to say much except to say that I personally believe that that burnout is one of the huge issues facing academic medicine and medicine in general. And of course, the data shows that it disproportionately affects women. And again, just for definition's sake, I want to also acknowledge that when I say women, I'm talking about all who identify as women. So it feels a lot like there's sort of 1,000 pounds of feathers. I mean, any one of the microaggressions or challenges or barriers that you have experienced in and of itself, you go on, and we all have gone on. You are going on. That's why you're here. But there's conscious and unconscious bias that devalues women and devalues those in underrepresented in medicine groups. And that is just a heavy daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly load. The salary discrepancies I just mentioned, thinking about mentorship and sponsorship, balancing work and life, and again, making our cultures welcoming and a place for us to thrive. And so as we think about all of these issues and challenges that we have to work on, there's kind of two ways that at least I've always looked at it. There's sort of the top-down approach, the changes that really have to come when our leaders are fully committed to making the changes needed. And that often feels, for many of us, depending on the positions you're in and your spheres of influence, like a tough thing to impact. And then there's bottom-up things, the things that we can do as CEOs of our own careers. And I really just wanted to mention a few of those, but acknowledging that so much of culture change is sort of top down with the leadership involved on procedures and all the kinds of policies that get put in place around promotion and hiring and search, and bottom up. This is a talk about bottom up. So this one, I just have to start out. I mean, sounds obvious. You ought to clarify your vision for the next 10 years. And I can just tell you that, I've been hearing that when I was, a junior faculty member, and I know the faculty that I work with say that they do this, but we go through an exercise in our career leadership programs that I would encourage you to consider doing. And it literally involves writing down, like on your computer or on a piece of paper, what your goals are over the next 10 years in all 4 domains of your life, always thinking about your career along with your home and family, the people who you care the most about, your community and yourself, and actually writing those down. And then doing this exercise we call looking back to the future, where you take the perspective of 10 years from now, and you're sitting down, let's say, with someone who you haven't seen in 10 years, and you say, here's what my life looks like right now. Here's what I've done over the past 10 years. And here's what my life looks like. And it sounds simple, but let me tell you, if you don't actually do it and the writing of it, and then sharing it with a trusted colleague. And I would encourage many of you, if not all of you, to sit down and do this with a colleague who you feel comfortable with, and really share with each other what this 10-year view looks like. So, number 2, asking for what you need. Boy, I can't tell you how often all of us, myself, other faculty, have wanted to make a change, wanted to ask for a change, wanted to tweak their job, their position, their anything from, of course, salary to space, to being put on a committee. And really don't ask for it. and I mean, of course, books have been written about this, about, women don't ask, of course, but, women often don't ask. And I'm not saying that you need to ask for everything you need. And of course, you need to think about it. And you need to discuss this with mentors or at least trusted colleagues. You need to do your homework. But I think that we err too much on not asking for what we need. And of course, they can always say no. And, is there a downside to it? Yeah, you have to make the calculation and you have to think about it. But in general, I think we don't ask enough for what we need. And I will also say that it's often an iterative process where you ask for something time 1, then it's no, and time 2, it's no, and time 3, it's maybe, and time 4, it's okay, let's try it. I certainly experienced that in my own career where I not to get into the specifics, but wanted something and spent about 4 years asking my chair, and he eventually came around and it all worked out. But it was definitely an iterative process that began with no and then eventually went to yes. And this really brings us into, the whole sort of sphere of negotiation, of which, of course, this brief talk can't really address. I mean, a negotiation can be a whole workshop for a week. But I wanted to put this in here because I just think in general, we're just have negotiation often framed as something that is a battle, something that is really like a difficult and uncomfortable conversation that's got sort of a brinksmanship mentality. And, I've been fortunate enough to hear a couple of great negotiation talks and workshops along with reading on this that have really reframed negotiation, I think, for many of us as something that's just a conversation. And, or at least, you go into it thinking that it's something that's going to be creative problem solving and involves a lot of listening, in fact. And yes, a few questions, but really is something that I think can be reframed to creative problem solving and a lot about relationships, which I frankly think women are way better at in many ways. And that with looking at it differently, there's just nothing to be afraid of, and we should be doing it more. And clearly, Linda Babcock with The Women Don't Ask, and then she wrote Ask for It, and there's many other great books, great podcasts, great YouTubes, and Getting to Yes, which is here, is a sort of a classic negotiation book. But I think that just another point, again, just scratching the surface about negotiation and a sort of a new way to look at it, is that, yes, you need to do your homework. And of course, a lot of negotiation talks focus on salary, but it's all about so many other things, so many other opportunities and resources. Role playing before you get into a particularly important negotiation, I would highly recommend. And of course, working with your mentors or other trusted colleagues, understanding your value. But the real point I want to make here is that so much of negotiation, it turns out, is about understanding other people's interests and their point of view. And what lies behind, or so to speak, underneath the position that they take. And again, I just think women are excellent at this and really can just look at it in a whole new way, and that we should negotiate more with this sort of attitude. Okay, number 3, what about managing up? I certainly see all the time, I think, a reluctance or maybe just not appreciating that managing up is something that we should all do. You should consider managing up more. And what do I mean by that? I mean, not only understanding what your bosses and your mentors, how they like to communicate, are these the folks that want an email or want things very lined out or just want you to drop by? What are their highest priorities? Of course, probably the most important question you need to ask your mentors and your boss. And if you haven't ever done that in just such a direct way, what are your highest priorities? I would say do that at your next opportunity or your next meeting, your annual review, whenever. And I think that keeping your boss and your mentors more in the loop of what you do is something that can really benefit you and again, all of us. I even though I've known this, I'm not even sure I did this enough myself. In fact, I'm emeritus, and I just sent my chair, who I still want to have a relationship with, an email about what I've done since I've, quote, retired. And I just think that bosses like to know what their faculty are doing, and they're never going to be able to keep track. I mean, faculty numbers are huge. So, when was the last time you wrote them an email and said, I'm sitting on the XY committee, and that committee has been raising some important issues regarding changing promotion criteria, for example, to include community service and how we might do that. If you're part of that committee, I think that might be worth a very brief email to your mentors or your boss about your role on that committee and informing them. Bosses like to know what's going on. Just think we should do that more. What about putting yourself out there? Easier said than done. Self-promotion is a piece, I think, of what helps us all advance, helps us, get the positions and have the career that we want. It's not always easy, and clearly, if you're overwhelmed, you're gonna have to think about what's worth doing and what's not, and definitely saying no is a leadership skill. But here I'm really talking about saying yes when it's appropriate and when you have the bandwidth to do it. And the volunteering for talks and positions, either chairing committees or being on committees, is something that that you should consider doing when you think it's worth it, or especially when it might be energizing to you and not just additional work. I am going to say just a little bit about introverts, because I am one, and I think there's actually a lot of introverts in science and medicine, and sometimes very public sort of activities like giving talks are pretty exhausting for introverts, even though they can do an excellent job at it. It's just that they need more recovery time, and they need that in the kind of solitude-driven activities. And I don't know, for those of you that might be introverts or think of yourself as introverts, one of the best books in the world is Quiet by Susan Cain, and really can help you understand what that really is. And it's not always what you think it is, but it is a lot about rejuvenating yourself and sort of recovery time, often in solitude kinds of activities. Putting yourself up for an award or nominating yourself. People are so busy, and everyone is so, as a baseline, overextended, that there are so many times when I've known that someone was a good candidate for award, and it's just so easy, frankly, not to do it. And we need to do it more, and we want to do it more. But if the person comes to me and says, "Would you consider putting me up?" I'm going to do it. And so it's like, I think I think there's just so many people, and people are so busy, that you have to think about putting yourself up, nominating yourself, or asking colleagues or mentors to do that for you. And again, there's humble types out there, especially people who come from certain family cultures or ethnic cultures for which too much self-promotion is a very difficult thing. And I think often we have to help our mentees and help each other by thinking about it not so much as self-promotion, but as promotion of the science, the incredibly important research, or the incredibly important program that you run, and the people that that's going to benefit, or about the team. I mean, there's ways of doing it, but we got to do it. And then throwing your hat in for a reach position. I mean, I think that I often see folks, shying away from this because it's seen as, well, I'm probably not going to get it, and here's all the reasons I'm not going to get it. And we know that women feel they have to be sort of 100% qualified with all the experience ever needed to be out there, and men don't look at it that way. Now, I mean, I think that the truth is that so many of these women are so talented, they're so qualified. We need to encourage each other to do that, but also just throw your hat in the ring, because so many times when you are on a list and you have applied for an award or for a position, and a committee looks at that even if you don't get it, it's raised your profile in your community hugely. And so even not getting it, it's a benefit to your career most of the time, in that people really know now who you are, your talents, and it will end up circling back to benefit you, even if you don't get the position. Now, utilizing mentors and sponsors, I know you all know to take advantage of your mentorship, but I think what gets lost a lot is how much, as a junior faculty member, you have to drive that bus. Again, senior faculty, mid-career faculty who may be serving as your mentors, they're busy too. And if you take a back seat in this process, you're not going to get as much out of the mentoring. And that really gets down to things like scheduling the meetings and planning the agenda and sending it to your mentor ahead of time. Of course, having multiple mentors, that's so important. But, really driving that relationship and making those meetings happen, having those check-ins and a thank you note afterwards. I think that goes a long way for sort of an appreciative approach to this. And so really taking a very proactive role in utilizing your mentors. And then there's been lots of talk over the last 10 years, I know, about sponsorship, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know the difference with a sponsor being someone who doesn't just have knowledge and is willing to share it with you, but has power. So clearly the data that we have shows that women are not often sponsored as often as men. But I would just say that this is a little difficult because sponsors have to use their credibility and their reputation to advance an individual who's untapped or underappreciated for their leadership talent. And I think as junior faculty, while you can be aware and try to cultivate some of those relationships, this is a message that needs to go to senior faculty. We as senior faculty, we need to be sponsoring more. Oh my gosh, that's power that's in our hands that we could use now. So I don't know how many senior faculty are on this call, but we need to look around and use that power that's taken us often decades to accrue, but we can do more of that. Taking advantage of leadership programs, I think Emily, this is something that you care about and you are right on in this. And leadership programs, not only at your institution, but leadership programs that are outside. I think that it's so important that you get a perspective outside your institution, because it's sometimes so hard to figure out, are some of the challenges that you're facing, is it a result of the specific climate that you're in? Are these things that are your leaders And then you get outside of that box and you may realize, wait, this is academic medicine, or this is my specialty, going down a certain road. And boy, have I had to face that in emergency medicine, you know, thinking for like all of these issues, it's the problem at my institution. And then unfortunately, taking in that it's really kind of a national emergency medicine issue. Anyway, so important to do these programs that are outside also, I mean, of your institution. And some of them are with your specialty organizations, and obviously building your network and getting invitations to give talks or to work on papers or to collaborate. I mean, it's just an amazing resource that you can make happen. And along those same lines, I mean, I sort of have here with the focus program at Penn, you know, we do have a ton of what we call single sessions. And I think single sessions are incredibly important. I mean, you know, it's an hour at lunchtime, sometimes just like this, and it can open your eyes to an area. But really tackling an issue that you want to tackle in your career, these cohort programs that are multi-sessions, like we run one that's for later stage of career, that's a 4-session program, goes over 4 months, a mid-career one that goes, again, over 4 sessions, a time management one that works 2 or 3 sessions, and they have experiments, and then people come back and they talk about how their experience worked and didn't work. We have a manuscript writing group for 14 sessions. I mean, these are the places where you can really get in to, I think, making significant headway on some of the things that are important to you. So, you know, I would encourage you at your institutions to sort of work with your faculty development folks or the folks that run your programs, or even forming them yourself. I mean, manuscript writing groups have been formed by just women getting together. These are just really valuable. I want to be aware of my time. I'm going to finish up in the next 3 minutes. Bias against assertiveness in women. Boy, that just seems, again, so obvious. But I think that took me about 20 years to sort of really wrap my brain around. And when I finally learned a lot about unconscious bias, sort of about 20 years ago, and it was, you know, so much research, I mean, compelling research about unconscious bias and conscious bias, but I'm mostly unconscious bias, which is so difficult, right? Because the people themselves have no idea that they're actually harboring those biases. But the bias against assertiveness in women is one of that is particularly difficult for all of us to navigate the fact that the qualities required of leaders, sort of decisiveness and assertiveness, are those that are often at odds with sort of society's definition, not just academic medicine's definition of femininity, and that you're penalized often for adopting a highly assertive style, as it's, you know, not society's expectations and norms. This goes way beyond academic medicine, but navigating that narrow band of behavior has been difficult and in many ways exhausting. I do think that it's getting better because we have so many more women leaders and so many more role models with different leadership styles that I think we're chipping away at some of this. But boy, finally realizing this helped me personally appreciate, like, I used to struggle with, why am I not more aggressive? Why am I not more assertive? Why am I not out there? And then finally realizing that, in fact, I was making these mental calculations without even realizing it, that there was going to be some unlikability, and that also plays out. So, there's no way to deal with that. I don't have an answer. Maybe somebody else will have some thoughts about that. I hope so. But I think that managing that likability competence trade-off can be very exhausting. And I think for me, just acknowledging it, naming it, tamed it a bit. And I do think I read a great Harvard Business Review article by Abera and Ellie and Kolb, they're great writers and do a lot of writing about women's leadership, that, you know, sometimes you just have to like let that go. Like you can't really worry about it, and you can't become obsessed with that. And anchoring in purpose, and again, this seems sort of, I don't know, maybe obvious, but anchoring in purpose is maybe the best way to deal with that. And just remembering that there's shared goals, and that you are leading and working on those. And also, I think, helps women see networking, which is so important, more than just transactional, but something that's a means to the larger purpose. And so finally, I'm going to end by just saying that that we've been talking an awful lot about the left side of this slide, the planning side. It's about, you know, your training, and you're setting your goals, and your mentors, and managing up, and, you know, thinking about what you want and how to get there. But there's this wonderful thing, thank God. We don't have control of everything. We don't even have any control over some of this serendipitous stuff that happens. And it's wonderful. And in there, there's so many unexpected opportunities. And so we got to sort of keep our eyes up, not too much down at the next task and the to-do list, because people will often say, as they look back on their careers, that the things on the right side here were the best things that ever happened to them. And certainly COVID and the racial reckoning crises together, I think, are throwing some of these unexpected things at us, and that there's some silver linings in there. Well, thank you so much. I'm finished, and hope I didn't go too far over. Thank you.